At 11:58 a.m. on September 1st, 1923, lunch fires burned in Tokyo and Yokohama. Rice simmered, kettles rattled, and the air hung hot and dry. Streetcars rang and clattered. Shopkeepers counted coins. Then the ground reared. A long heave threw bricks from walls and people from their feet. A second, jagged shudder turned alleys into sawteeth. Windows burst, slate slid like knives, wooden houses flexed, groaned, and fell. In Yokohama's harbor, ships snapped at their lines as the seabed convulsed, and brick warehouses came apart in red dust. No number on a seismograph could hold what it felt like to be small in that noise, but later the books would say magnitude 7.9. The quake alone took lives by the thousands. Whole blocks toppled, rails buckled into iron ribbon, bridges lurched from their abutments, mountains shrugged rock onto roads already crowded with dazed survivors. But the catastrophe that defined the day started small and everywhere. A cooking fire tipping, a brazier overturning, a kerosene lamp falling, and a wind that rose at the worst possible hour. Gas mains cracked, papers and timbers caught, embers lofted into gusts that ran like a river. Scattered blazes learned each other's names and became a city-wide conversation in flame. Firestorms formed where streets acted like chimneys. The air grew so hot that it moved on its own, sucking oxygen into roaring corridors that outran men at a sprint. Day turned the color of rust. People fled toward water, finding canals and riverbanks already crowded with families clutching bundles and children. Evacuees huddled in schoolyards, temple grounds, and parade fields because open space looked like safety. In places, the wind carried sparks across those spaces as if there were no gap at all. The worst killing ground was the Army clothing depot at Honjo. Tens of thousands gathered there by instinct and rumor, believing the drill field would save them. When the firestorm reached the depot, a vortex formed, a pillar of flame that fed on its own wind and rotated like a living thing. Witnesses later said it sounded like a waterfall and a furnace at once. In minutes, the crowd was overcome. When rescuers finally reached the grounds, they found layers upon layers of ash and bone. 30,000 people died at a single address. Across Tokyo, other names became synonyms for ruin. Nihonbashi's markets, Kanda's bookshops, Asakusa's amusement halls, where reels of nitrate film flashed once and never again. Yokohama, nearer the quake's center, fared no better. The Bund, its proud foreign settlement, ended the day as a scorched geometry of foundations. Trains derailed. A landslide carried homes into the sea. Harbor fires leapt from ship to ship until piers themselves burned like torches. Messages failed. Telegraph lines sagged and died. Switchboards melted. Couriers became rumors' legs. People searched for family along routes that no longer existed. A father walked block to block holding a child's sandal. A mother scrawled names on a temple gate with charcoal and prayed that the missing would read them. Doctors set up tables in courtyards and worked by sun and smoke. Nurses made bandages from kimonos. In parks, soldiers boiled water in field pots. In alleys, neighbors shared wells until the buckets came up the color of ash. In the smoke and panic, other flames, uglier ones, were set by human hands. False whispers accused Korean immigrants of poisoning wells and setting fires, and vigilante mobs answered lies with machetes and clubs. Hundreds were murdered. Some officials tried to stop the killings, others indulged them. The disaster became a pretext for cruelty that survivors would carry in memory as bitterly as the burns. The government later acknowledged the massacres, but confession did not restore the dead. When wind finally fell and embers cooled, the count began. More than 100,000 people were dead or missing. 500,000 homes had burned or collapsed. Warehouses, banks, factories, ministries, the machinery of a modern nation, lay in rubble. The emperor appeared in a white uniform to tour ruins with a face set to grief. Relief ships came from abroad with flour, medicine, tents, and condolence. Aid mattered, but the wound was a city wide and the bandage small. Rebuilding was not only brick on brick, it was policy. Planners widened avenues into fire breaks and carved parks to serve as evacuation zones. New codes favored concrete and steel over timber and paper screens. Water mains were looped and duplicated. Cisterns were tucked into neighborhoods like hidden wells against the next bad day. Monuments rose in places where crowds had died, not to decorate, but to instruct. The map of Tokyo changed because the old map had failed. Loss rearranged private lives, too. Families moved in with distant cousins and called it home because they had no other word. Shopkeepers rebuilt stalls from doors laid over crates. Children learned evacuation drills along with their alphabets. Photographers documented streets with no buildings and survivors with bandaged faces, creating the first draft of memory. Poets wrote of fireflies that were not insects, but sparks trapped in hair. Priests chanted for the unnamed dead. Carpenters measured beams against the height of their children and shaved them thicker. The quake also shifted politics. Reconstruction empowered new technocrats. Hardliners used the chaos to harass dissidents. The press, reduced and rattled, learned to print caution alongside courage. In the following years, some would argue that 1923 marked a hinge, a moment when fear, nationalism, and modern ambition braided into a rope strong enough to pull the country toward choices that would matter far beyond Kanto. That reading does not blame the earth for what followed, but it does remind us how disasters echo in chambers we call culture and state. Engineers later reconstructed the physics of the firestorms. 1,000 small blazes created enough updraft to pull in winds over 30 meters per second. The rising column fed itself, just as a chimney pulls harder when the fire below grows hotter. Wooden row houses, closely spaced, eave to eaved, offered the perfect fuel geometry. In many wards, streets ran narrow and crooked, making it easy for sparks to corner those fleeing. Even the Sumida's broad water could not fully save those who waded in. Radiant heat burned exposed skin, and floating debris smoldered around them. Firefighters dragged hoses through streets that no longer existed and watched streams flash to steam before they touched the flame. Water pressure died as mains ruptured. In diaries, captains wrote a single line for the day: "Could not get in." Survivors taught practical wisdom that lived longer than regulations. Families kept bosai bags by the door: water, hardtack, towels, a whistle, a coil of rope. Neighborhoods set watch schedules for dry, windy days and checked the elderly first when shaking began. Schools posted maps to nearest parks and practiced moving there without panic. Shopkeepers learned to shutter braziers at noon when the summer wind turned. And out of grief, a civic habit formed. Preparation was not a luxury but a courtesy to strangers, because in a city this dense, your carelessness could be someone else's last minute. Stand today at a quiet corner of Sumida Park and read the plaques. The river looks mild, the trees throw good shade, children run past with paper kites. The ground remembers, even if the surface forgets. In late summer, when the air holds its breath, a kitchen timer rings and someone turns down a burner. Small prudence learned from a large lesson. The city's sirens still test on schedule. People still glance up at the wires in the sky. And every September, bells toll for those who did not outrun wind and flame. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.